And somewhere in the press boxes and broadcast booths and living rooms of people who have spent their entire lives inside this sport, people who have thrown baseballs and caught baseballs and studied baseballs with the accumulated obsession of careers built around understanding what excellence in this game actually looks like, something shifted. Not opinion. Not the ordinary recalibration that follows a good performance by a good pitcher in a good game. Something more permanent than that. Something that happens at a specific threshold of evidence, when the performances have accumulated to a number and a quality that makes the conversation about what a pitcher is no longer a projection or a hope or a careful hedging of assessment against the risk of being wrong. When it becomes a conclusion. Yoshinobu Yamamoto crossed that threshold on a Tuesday night in front of a crowd that gave him something that baseball crowds reserve for the moments they understand they are witnessing rather than just watching. They gave him a standing ovation on the way to the dugout. Mid-game. 7th inning. Walking off a mound he had just dominated for 98 pitches that produced the cleanest line of the season. The crowd rose before he reached the foul line. And the legends, the men whose names live in the permanent record of what pitching at the highest level of this sport looks like, started talking. What they said was not what the standard post-performance commentary sounds like. Standard post-performance commentary has a shape that anyone who follows baseball recognizes: the acknowledgement of the numbers, the contextual comparisons to recent performances, the careful hedging that experienced analysts apply to avoid the overclaiming that a sport as humbling as baseball eventually punishes. What the legend said was different. It was candid in the specific way that candor arrives when people who have earned the right to a strong opinion finally decide to stop managing it and simply express it. When the professional caution that comes with having been wrong before about talented pitchers yields to something more direct, the recognition that, in this instance, the caution is no longer serving accuracy. That the measured response has become less honest than the immoderate one. They didn't hedge. And that, more than any specific thing they said, was the story. The first to speak was a man whose name belongs to a different era of the sport. He had won the Cy Young twice. Had pitched in 4 World Series. Had spent the second half of his professional life in broadcast booths and analysts' chairs and the specific public role that great former players occupy when the playing is over and the watching begins, the role of someone whose opinion carries the weight of actual knowledge rather than educated observation. He said, "I want to say something about Yamamoto that I have been thinking about for several weeks and have been reluctant to say publicly because I am aware of how it sounds and I am aware of the history of overstatement when it comes to young pitchers who are having excellent seasons." He paused. He said, "I no longer think it sounds like overstatement." He said, "The pitch mix this kid has, the way he sequences, the way he sets up his strikeout pitch with the 2 pitches that precede it, the way he reads a lineup's tendencies in real time and adjusts within the game rather than just executing a pre-game plan. I have not seen that combination since the last time I was standing in a batter's box trying to figure out how to hit someone who was doing exactly what Yamamoto does." He said, "That was a very long time ago." He said, "And I could not figure it out then either." The second voice belonged to someone from a more recent era. A 3-time All-Star. A pitcher who had been, at his peak, the most feared arm in his league for a period long enough that the fear was not a moment but a sustained condition of competitive reality. Someone who understood, from the inside, what it felt like to have the thing, the specific, unnameable quality that separates pitchers who are very good from pitchers who are something more than that. He said, "There's a moment in a game, usually somewhere between the 4th and 6th inning, when a pitcher has been through the lineup once or twice and the hitters have had a chance to see what he has, where you find out who someone actually is. Where the stuff isn't enough anymore and the pitcher has to become something more than his velocity and his movement." He said, "What I watched Yamamoto do tonight in the 5th inning, when they had the scouting report working and the lineup was making adjustments and he needed to answer with something other than what he had already shown them, was the clearest answer to that question I have seen from a pitcher in years." He said, "He reached for something different. Something they hadn't seen. Something he had been saving not because he needed to save it but because he knew that the moment for it hadn't arrived yet. And he threw it in the exact moment the moment arrived." He said, "That's not stuff. That's pitching. Real pitching. The kind that doesn't show up in velocity readings or spin rate numbers. The kind that lives in here." He touched his temple. Then said, 10 strikeouts. 7 scoreless. 9 wins. And the Cy Young conversation isn't premature anymore. It's actually overdue. The third legend came from the announcer's booth. He had been a pitcher first, a closer, specifically, whose career had been defined by the specific pressure of arriving in situations that were already on fire and putting them out with nothing but a baseball and the psychological architecture of someone who was built for exactly that environment. He had spent the years since his playing career watching other pitchers with the particular attention of someone who knows what he is looking for because he once had it himself and understands precisely what its presence looks like and what its absence reveals. He said, "I want to talk about the 10th strikeout." He said, "Not because it was the most important thing that happened tonight, the 7th scoreless inning was more important, the 5th inning adjustment was more important. But because the 10th strikeout happened in the 7th inning against the best hitter in the opposing lineup. Against a man who does not strike out easily. Against a man who had already seen Yamamoto for 2 full at-bats and had made adjustments of his own." He said, "The pitch Yamamoto threw for that strikeout, the pitch he chose, the location he chose, the velocity he chose, was not the pitch the analytics suggested. It was not the pitch the pre-game meeting had identified as the highest percentage option in that count against that hitter. He said, it was the pitch that Yamamoto decided was right in that moment. Based on what he had learned about that hitter over 2 at-bats and 7 innings of reading a lineup. He said, and he was right." He stopped. Then said quietly, "That's the thing about the great ones. They're right about these things when they decide to trust themselves. And they trust themselves at exactly the moment the rest of us would be looking at our notes." The Cy Young conversation had been present before this start. It had existed in the careful, qualified form that baseball conversations take when they are acknowledging something real without committing to it fully, the talk show discussions and the analytical columns and the prediction markets that had Yamamoto's name appearing with increasing frequency in the first-tier conversation without quite placing him at the top of it. What the Tuesday night performance did was convert the careful, qualified form into something more direct. By Wednesday morning, the conversation had changed shape. It was no longer asking whether Yamamoto deserved to be in the Cy Young discussion. It was asking whether anyone deserved to be ahead of him. Whether the 9 wins and the ERA that had been constructed over the course of a season that had included starts where he was magnificent and starts where he was merely excellent and no starts where he was anything other than one of the most difficult pitchers in the National League to score against, whether that body of work, in the totality of its accumulation, had arrived at a place where the award conversation was not a prediction but an assessment. The numbers, when laid out completely, made the case without requiring elaboration. The legends had made it with elaboration anyway. Because numbers without voice are incomplete. Because the Cy Young Award is not just a statistical determination, it is the sport's recognition of something that statistical determination can point toward but cannot fully contain. The recognition of pitching excellence as a lived experience. As something felt by the hitters who face it and the teammates who benefit from it and the crowds who rise for it in the 7th inning before a man has reached the foul line. The crowd that rose on Tuesday night understood something. The legends confirmed what the crowd understood. Yamamoto spoke after the game with the specific composure that great performances sometimes produce, the calm that comes not from indifference to what has been achieved but from the completeness of the focus that achieving it required. A calm that is actually exhaustion wearing the mask of serenity. He answered questions about pitch selection. About the 5th inning adjustment. About the 10th strikeout and what he had been thinking in that count against that hitter. His answers were precise and honest and revealed the specific quality of his thinking, the baseball intelligence that the legends had been describing from the outside, now visible from the inside in the language he used to explain decisions he had made in real time. A reporter asked, "There is significant Cy Young discussion happening tonight. How do you receive that?" Yamamoto was quiet for a moment. Then said, "I receive it as motivation. Not as something I am comfortable with. Comfortable doesn't help me get better. Motivation does." The reporter asked, "Do you feel like you deserve to be in that conversation?" He said, "I feel like I deserve tonight. What the season deserves, that's for other people to decide." Another reporter asked, "The standing ovation in the 7th, when you were walking off the mound. What did you feel?" Yamamoto was quiet for longer than his other answers had required. Then said, "Grateful. Just grateful. I am far from home. Doing something very hard. In a place that is still new to me in ways that don't always show from the outside." He paused. Said, "When people stand up like that, when they give you that, it means they see you. Not the pitcher. You. The person doing the work." His voice changed slightly. Not breaking. Just carrying something heavier than the words themselves. He said, "I needed to feel seen tonight. And I did." Ohtani had watched the game from the dugout. He had watched every inning. With the full, unbroken attention that he brings to the performances of people he respects, the kind of watching that is itself a form of acknowledgement. A form of presence. When Yamamoto walked into the clubhouse after the final out, when he moved through the congratulations and the backslaps and the specific warmth of a team that had just watched one of their own do something genuinely great, Ohtani was standing near his locker. He didn't say much. He said, "I knew you had that." Yamamoto looked at him. Ohtani said, "From the first inning. I could see it. The way you were moving. The way you were holding the ball. I knew it was going to be one of those nights." Yamamoto said, "How?" Ohtani said, "Because I've felt it myself. And I recognize it when I see it in someone else." He turned back to his locker. Then said, almost to himself, quietly enough that Yamamoto almost missed it. He said, 9 wins.